Hey guys, what's going on? Paul here, back with another Cardano live stream. And Paddy has pulled himself out of bed, got away from his man flu, and is fit to join us again this week. Also have Pi, great to have Pi on the channel. Lots of knowledge across the Cardano space. I'm sure lots of people will be familiar. Guys, you're very welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I've been on your channel a bunch, Paul, but I don't know if I've ever been on one of your live shows, so this is fun.
Yeah, it's great. So we're on, what are we on now, Paddy? Well, it's episode 16 for me, 15 for you because of man flu. But
Okay, man flu jokes. That's enough. It was a very serious dose, and you'll hear a few coughs tonight. I'm still not 100, but I'm getting there. It's been tough going. As some of you might have suffered through man flu before, it's a deadly disease. So I'm lucky to actually be here, I suppose. It's the best way to talk about it. So, yeah, Pi, thanks for joining us, man. Really glad to have us on. There's some interesting topics, and I'm looking forward to getting your take on. So, yeah, let's have fun tonight. Hopefully, Paul, an hour and a half. We'll maybe do it this week. Who knows?
So we've been getting good on that, getting in under the time we aim for. Well, look, let's jump straight in, and I'm going to take notes as I go for timestamps down below for people who are rewatching this. There should be timestamps down below for the different topics we'll cover, because I think there'll be lots of different ones as we go. And welcome to everyone coming in. If you want to share it out, that'll help bring more people in, bring more questions. The more people that get in, ask questions, the better that this can be. So I appreciate anyone that shares it out, and we're here every Wednesday at this time. Pi, for anyone not familiar with yourself, can you give the intro, and then we'll get into your thoughts on Cardano and then some of the latest things that are going on within the Cardano ecosystem?
Yeah, so I'm Pi Lanningham. That's Pi like the number. I like to describe myself as a mathematician by passion, software engineer by trade. I have a master's in mathematics focusing on like topology, and I really like that abstract mathematics. And then, I build software for a living, and my kind of last 2 years of my life, coming up on my 2-year anniversary with, I've been working at Sundaeswap, first as the CIO, chief, we used to joke chief ice cream officer, but chief information officer, really focused on kind of building out the tech and the tech team under our fantastic previous CTO, Matt. And then, he left the company, kind of decided to take it easy for a while, left on good terms. And so I stepped up into the CTO role, where I've been serving ever since. And yeah, I'm really passionate about Cardano. You might have also seen me in a bunch of the governance discussions lately. Attended the workshop that IOG held in Colorado, kind of engage in what I hope is productive conversation on Twitter about it, and recently hosted a little mini workshop around kind of drafting a SIP with the community about what metadata should we attach to these governance actions. So I just try to be involved like across Cardano as a whole. I'm also an advisor on a number of projects, Liquid, Ada Handle, and Atrium, and just really trying to promote and build the best and most interconnected Cardano ecosystem that I can contribute to.
Can I ask a random question, Pi? Because you've obviously done something, you've released something, and I don't know if I spoke to many people like yourself about it. And from a software and engineering perspective, how hard is it to build on Cardano? Everybody talks about it. Everybody tells, oh, it's so hard, it's impossible. Like, you guys have released something. So I can relate from like doing C and C++ programming a long time ago. And I go to myself, that was hard, How hard is it? And maybe is there any way that you could relate to maybe normal people, but people who don't really know the ins and outs?
Yeah. I will say incredibly hard, one of the biggest challenges of my career, but getting easier. And so then I'll elaborate on that a bit. So especially back during the period where Sundaeswap was writing its smart contracts and trying to get to that V1 launch, it was the Wild West, right? So it sounds like you have a little bit of programming background. It felt like being a programmer in the 80s or the 70s, because we were looking at raw byte dumps, hexadecimal dumps to try to debug things. We had no error messages. So, we were worried about 16 kilobyte limits, right? Like there were all of these ways where by being on that frontier and pushing that boundary, there wasn't the tools that we've grown used to as developers, the IDE support, the error messages, error feedback at all. So at one point in Sunday's development, we were building and submitting transactions and they just disappear. The Cardano node wouldn't tell us they failed. It wouldn't tell us they succeeded. They would just like disappear into the void, and maybe they would show up on chain. And so like trying to debug and reason through what's wrong there, incredibly difficult, huge challenge. The good news is that especially over the last year, that is really starting to change. And I think maybe 6 months ago, we hit an inflection point. There's now a lot more powerful tools for diagnosing and developing those smart contracts. There's a lot more diversity in the languages you can start to use, looking at Aiken and Helios and other things like that. Mm-hmm. There's really great developer environment setup tools like Demeter. So all of these are like, I still wouldn't say, my personal opinion is that Algorand is probably best in class in this area for developer experience. We love ourselves a John Woods. He's doing great over there. We're not great for that, but it is starting to turn around, and I really enjoy seeing that. So
it is hard, but getting better. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I'll take it. I've always wondered, and everybody says it, and they've always been wondering. All right, Paul. Sorry for
no, you're right. Yeah, I think that that goes in line with most of the developers that I've talked to. They all say the same about how hard it was and still is difficult to build, but a lot more options coming out all the time to start building your contracts in different languages that you don't you don't have to know Plutus or be a hardcore Haskell developer now to build on top of Cardano. There's lots of different libraries coming out all the time, and over the next 6 to 12 months, I think that's only going to get easier and easier.
Yeah, and I think, to kind of elaborate on that, I think Haskell is a great language, right? I think it fills a certain niche, and if you like developing Haskell, Plutus works fairly well for you. The problem I see is not necessarily that like, oh, Haskell was super opaque to developers. It's not actually that much harder, especially for smart contracts. The problem is Haskell has kind of a shroud around it of academia and like category theory that you have to penetrate. Like when you're just writing the smart contracts, it's very simple code. It's like ands and ors on conditions. The problem is there's this like cloud of intelligentsia and academia and like monads and stuff like that around that core smart contract development that's very difficult to penetrate and can like deter a lot of people. The tooling isn't best in class for Haskell because for a long time it was a very academic language. It's very real world nowadays, but if you compare it to things like Cargo from Rust or NPM from JavaScript, the maturity of that tooling for having packages and running and being able to, there's no step through debugger that at least that I know of for Haskell and things like that. That can be a big barrier for people. So it's not necessarily the smart contract code itself that's hard to write in Haskell. It's the tooling around it to like, okay, but like I've written down some characters. What do I do with those files? And so maybe we'll see that improve over time. There's also the frustrating aspect for a Haskell developer building on Cardano is that Plutus doesn't always behave like you would expect a Haskell program to behave, right? The syntax looks very much like Haskell, but like, to analogize it, imagine somebody speaking English but using a lot of slang in the sense that like, oh, I know what the term lit means, but I may not know what it means in context, right? And so for like a Plutus developer, I may know as a Haskell developer, I may know that this is lazy evaluation and how it's going to, perform. But then the actual Plutus language, when it's evaluated by the virtual machine, behaves slightly differently or doesn't allow things that Haskell normally would. and that can be a big friction point for Haskell developers. So it's not a great story for non-Haskell developers, and it's better, but also not a great story for non-Haskell or for Haskell developers. So I think that's where it gets its bad rap. But like as a language itself, and as just being Haskell isn't necessarily the core of the problem.
Okay. Actually, I'm going to ask one question, but not to go too deep into the technicals on it. And then I'm going to catch up on the chat to make sure we haven't missed comments. And then we'll get into the different topics we have. But building on Cardano, you hear people talking about the on-chain code versus the off-chain code. You have your smart contracts. Can you give the high level, just how that works, or how building on Cardano works? Like, it's not just you write a smart contract and that interacts with the chain. You have the thing of off-chain code. Can you give the overview of what that actually is for anyone interested?
Sure. So this is a thing that exists in other ecosystems as well. There is, as far as I know, no blockchain that can serve a website to your Chrome browser, right? So like at the end of the day, even a dApp built over on Ethereum, you load up in your browser a UI, and then that talks potentially to some backend that is then talking to the blockchain. And so there's always this split of off-chain versus on-chain. And so fundamentally what that boils down to is the code that I'm writing going to be run by an end user, or is it going to be run on all of the validators of the blockchain, right? So in this case, or in Ethereum, and then I'll talk about Cardano, in Ethereum, what that means is like, okay, the front end UI that I'm interacting with, the buttons I'm clicking, are written off chain. The Ethereum miners aren't running that code. And then at some point in kind of the chain of custody of your action, you build and submit a transaction, right? And that gets submitted to the chain, and then that has code that is updating account balances, checking certain constraints, calling other smart contracts, etc. And that's the on-chain code. That's kind of in a sense more secure because it's run by every validator node. Now, I say that in air quotes because it could have its own flaws and stuff like that, but at least it has that like transparency and auditing for all of that. On the Cardano world, what's unique is that it makes that division between off-chain and on-chain code very clear. The on-chain code is explicitly and only the permissions to spend funds. So, if I lock up funds in a smart contract, in order to spend them, I run on-chain code that decides whether I can spend it. Whereas everything else is off-chain, right? All of the like querying results and like summing up the TVL for a DEX or things like that, all of that's usually done off-chain and fed to the UI or fed to the smart contract. And so for Cardano, that story of what is off-chain and what is on-chain is a lot. That division is cleaner, and you end up with a lot of off-chain code to basically follow the blockchain and what's happening to build up that aggregated state, that notion of, okay, here are all the open orders that I'm going to let the user execute or things like that. That aggregation so that you can present it to the user and so that you can build the correct transaction for that scenario is what's called the off-chain code. Does that kind of make that division clear?
Yeah, that's a good summary. Thanks. It's just something you hear a lot of people talking about, on-chain, off-chain, and I don't think, myself included, don't fully understand where the cutoff is a lot of the time. So I'm going to catch up on the comments, and then I'm going to hand it over to Paddy to take us through some of the different topics. There's a good one by Alex. Welcome, Alex, here every week and always getting involved. Do appreciate it. With the weekly stablecoin check-in, Indigo TVL up 8.4%, JED up 12.4%. Steady growth. Could debate over if weekly growth this high is healthy. For me, I think now probably looked even better yesterday because the markets have dropped a bit today. So these numbers were probably slightly higher yesterday. But for me, I think them type of numbers in a growing ecosystem are healthy. There's more people starting to get involved in DeFi on Cardano, and that is one of our topics. So we might bring up DeFi Llama in a few minutes, but what do you guys think? Healthy numbers or?
Way outside my realm of expertise. I think the only thought I have here is drawing a distinction between TVL and like yield. Because usually when people talk about like, oh, are these high numbers unhealthy? It's because, okay, extremely high yield indicates, where's that value coming from, right? So, we see this in DeFi a lot, protocols paying 300% APRs, 10,000% APRs. And, that there's hardly or very rarely situations where you're manufacturing values that high out of thin air. And so it's coming from somewhere. And so the unhealthiness is that coming from an unhealthy place? Or, where is that value coming from? Or is it just being manufactured off of the backs of, someone kicking the can down the road? Whereas TVL is not necessarily kind of subject to the same thing. It's just a representation of what value is entering the ecosystem from external sources, right? That value is coming from somewhere, but it's not, necessarily being paid out of somewhere. But beyond whether like the specific numbers or whatever, I'm a software developer, so.
You see, well, I have a wee screenshot there, and it was just the whole idea. And I have multiple opinions on TVL. I do see the growth, and I guess it's a good metric to track for growth. Whether it's a true representation of what's going on in the ecosystem, some could argue against. Some people are able to fudge the TVL, taking loans and reusing loans, and never ever ending cycle of money going round and round in circles. But I do like to see, the TVL of like for stablecoins going up. That's one good thing. And Cardano is growing. But there's always been a long sort of argument in Cardano. We don't like TVL, blah, blah, blah. It's not something that we want to get into. But, it's something that a lot of people share about. And it's probably more on the price side of things, Is it a key indicator of success of Cardano? I don't think so. Does it show progress? Yes. And that's sort of my opinion on that. I think I'd like to see, maybe it close to some of our rivals and say, well, look, they can't use it as a stick to beat us with anymore, because that was always their argument. Oh, your TVL is this and this and this. And like, okay, right, whatever, fine. It's growing. It's going to grow. It's an evolving ecosystem. Nothing goes from 0 to 100 billion within 1 year or 2 years, unless you release a really, really awesome project that everybody in the world likes.
Or a really scammy project.
That too. Well, Solana was able to show us how you could sort of fudge the whole TVL thing. Was that about a year ago, Paul?
Yeah, I think it was kind of last year. Yeah, that there was it two brothers who built a few different protocols, and the protocols were all stacked on top of each other. So the same initial funds were able to be counted by all of the protocols because they all locked up the funds, but it was, I don't know, was it locking up the LP tokens of the lower down projects, and they were able to fire up the TVL of Solana, which made it look really good, and the price obviously followed. Like, I think it's definitely a metric I do track and I keep an eye on to see how things are growing, or even to see how different individual protocols are starting to gain traction. It's not as important as some people make it out to be, but I think it definitely is a metric that does carry some weight across the spectrum, across all chains. It is a way to measure what's going on, but it's not a metric that should be used just as the only metric to measure across chains. You need to look at lots of different things. But for me, it's good to see the numbers starting to go back up for Cardano. Now, we do see there is a drop today that is due to the markets dropping, but also I was checking it out just before this, and I seen Liquid Finance. There was a big drop in Liquid. If you go down to Liquid, Paddy, you'd see it was at 60%. But it looks like that's just a reporting error, because I went into Liquid and I looked into the data that they're tracking, and all of the different Cardano addresses all seem to still have the ADA in there. So it doesn't look like if anyone else looks at it and thinks, shit.
I actually have some, I know why that, I have a strong suspicion of why that happens. So the way that, because this impacts the staking pools that ADA is delegated to as well. So the way that their contracts work is all of those locked TVL tokens are locked up in 16 different bundles, basically. Maybe more for different markets or whatever, but basically 16 different bundles. And what they do periodically is they gather it all into one so that they can recompute the Q token exchange rate, basically charging interest to the people who've borrowed, and then they split it up again. And the reason they split it up is to solve kind of contention issues. It's an alternative to the way that, for example, Sundaeswap or other DEXs work of batching, right? And so if you are looking at the addresses for those 16 UTXOs, and you happen to query the balance of those addresses in a moment where it's gathered them all up together into a different smart contract, then it'll look like there's zero in that smart contract. So sometimes, like, I run a stake pool operator. I'm lucky enough to be one of the stake pools that Liquid delegates to. So I keep an eye on, my delegation, and sometimes it'll drop down to like 100,000 ADA because they've like, quote unquote, rugged all of that ADA out while they're doing that batching. But then a few minutes later, it will come back. So that may be of what you were seeing when you saw that drop in Liquid.
That could be something to let DeFi allow me know. So they have fixed the pulse, but now they're reporting Liquid is up 37%.
Yeah, I seen it fixed when you refresh there that the data updated. So again, even that plus 37 might be because when they were pulling the data, some of it got tracked in two places. Maybe by the end of the stream, it might have evened out. We'll check back before we finish up here anyway, see where it sits. I'm going to flick through and see what other comments we've missed. And then, well, that was one of our topics to cover today. So it's good to have one. I'm going right back to the beginning here. Nam says he's seen our interview earlier. So yeah, the Sundaeswap V2 went live this week. Myself and Pi had a chat earlier today, and I put that video out. So anyone interested in a walkthrough of it or different things that are going on with Sundaeswap, you can check that out. We'll probably hit on some of the questions on Sundaeswap, but for the deeper dive, I will put a link to our interview from earlier on, Pi, down below.
Thanks for having me on the channel too.
I know, it was great to catch up and hear what's going on or what the latest is. Crazy Crypto says, for me and Paddy, do we use Sundaeswap or for our main Cardano DEX? If not, why not? For me, I don't have one main DEX that I use. It depends on the token that I'm trading, or the token or coin. Whichever one I'm trading, whichever DEX has the most liquidity, then that's the DEX that I use for that trade. And over the last while, I suppose that has been MinSwap, has the most liquidity for lots of different tokens. We'll see what happens. It depends on if a new token comes out and there's more liquidity on Sunday or on Wing Riders, then I use them for them individual trades.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. I've been totally transparent about kind of those changing dynamics. Really excited to see MinSwap doing so well. I think they're a great project in the community. There's obviously a little bit of competitiveness. We want to catch up and do our community proud and build the best product that we can. But excited to see any project doing well, as long as they're not rugging their community. So
I use them all, funny enough. Most of the time Muesli, but then I float around and look at different what's going on within the different DEXs. But I aggregate most of mine and then flick through each one and sort of pick the trade there and then who I believe is going to be better for myself. So I think it's good for people to shop around. There's a lot of people who are very fanatical about DEX allegiance. I think do whatever is best for yourself, more so than simply giving yourself a tattoo or a brand. But that's just me.
Well, and as somebody building one of those, I say the same thing, right? Like, part of what we're doing is to build a decentralized ecosystem. Part of that is decentralizing, the finance, right? And so when you decentralize, you don't just decentralize the tech. You want to decentralize the power and the economies and finances and things like that. So That wasn't a super cogent explanation, but I'm tired. But yeah, no, I give people the same advice: is, you know, shop around. I'm not asking anybody to be Sunday maxis either. You know, I just really want to build the best product that we can, the best protocol. We built and launched a protocol. Maybe building a V2 or maybe building a V2 of that protocol down the road, the smart contracts. And then, you know, we're also really focused on building a really great front end for that open protocol, which is what Sundaeswap Labs, the company, is. We're doing both of those things. So no maxiism here, basically.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's good to hear. And just because you're on, I'm afraid we can't turn around and say it is Sundaeswap or anything like that. For me, it always is. I'll check.
I would have been highly suspicious if you did say that.
Yeah, and I think everyone else watching would be as well. And for me, I have to stay neutral. And what I do is I look around the dexes, whatever one works best for me, because sometimes you could be looking to trade one pair and the slippage could be way too high on one deck. So I don't have an individual favorite one. Rise says Pie's here to pump our bags. I won't even take a comment for legal reasons, but
I'm just so unconcerned with price generally. Like I said, I'm just trying to build the best product that I can. So am I here to pump your product? Is that a thing people say? Yes. Your bags will do what your bags do.
Yeah, I think since I've got deeper into looking into different projects, I become bullish on certain protocols, but bearish on the token related to that protocol. So I have certain ones that I hold for long-term for trading, and then there's certain protocols I really like, but wouldn't hold individual tokens. Depends on what's going on. But I think it's okay to be a fan of a protocol, but not a fan of the token attached to it. And sometimes you need to highlight that you can like a protocol without having to hold the token or hold much of the token. I think looking at the other comments, the sound was fine there. What else have I missed? For Pi, what is most excited about seeing develop in the Cardano ecosystem over the next 12 months? That's a good question.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, I'm a little bit biased. I'm really excited about the stuff that Sundaeswap is going to be building over the next 12 months. Some of that is publicly known. Obviously, we just launched this V2 UI, which has a lot of cool features and sets us up to iterate and develop some really cool features. So I hope you like what you see in terms of that. We kind of teased a few of them in the announcement blog post yesterday and in the video with Paul earlier today. And we're also, you know, we have a much longer looking R&D arm. You know, we demoed a little bit of what we've been working on at Rare Bloom, where we demoed Hydra. Again, want to emphasize that's just like R&D work. You know, Hydra in and of itself, and Paul and I had a big discussion about this. Hydra in and of itself isn't really suitable for DEXs, Bear. So we're looking at long-term building out a protocol called Gummy Worm that has the advantages of Hydra, but is more geared toward, makes some different trade-offs and is more geared towards something like a DEX. So really excited about that. I'm really excited about some of the other stuff around governance and things like that, and even some things that I can't talk about publicly yet. In terms of the wider ecosystem of Cardano as a whole, I'm really excited to see other projects launching on Cardano. You know, Indigo is launched, Liquid is launched. We're really starting to see a diversity of things that you can do with Cardano. And what I'm really looking for and what I'm really trying to contribute to is an interconnectedness with those protocols. So we open sourced our Sunday SDK, and one of the features of Sundaeswap, the order contract, is you can chain it into another transaction. And so I'm really hoping that we can work with other projects to provide really interesting features like, you know, swapping Sunday into ADA, but having that paid directly into a CDP that mints IUSD, all as like one chain of transactions. And so exactly how that plays out or which projects are interested or things like that, I think that's where the Cardano ecosystem can be really exciting, is that interconnectedness. Because EUTXO is positioned well, I think, for if protocols are designed intelligently for that kind of interconnectedness. I'm also really excited to see governance, and we'll probably have a whole section talking about this later in the live stream. But on Twitter, and I've been really involved in governance in that pushing power to the edges, that we can self-govern on chain in an auditable way, and building those power structures that I've described crypto as a nuclear disarmament treaty with the existing power structures in our world, where we say, hey, you've accumulated a lot of power and that makes us really uncomfortable. Let's diffuse these bombs and supplant some of it with either power pushed out to the edges or automated protocols that you've diffused it fully into the software that we use.
I've seen and I've seen some of the stuff that you're posting out about governance. I think it's a big topic, and I know it's going to be tough. And I see you, like yourself and Rick and a few others that are well into it, and you're down that rabbit hole. And I think you had a bit of a workshop recently. When was it? I've lost track of days because I was ill, but it was recent. And how did this thing go? And how do you see the governance progressing? I'm very of the opinion I like what's going on. I like the growth in it, and I like the whole idea. But I hate politics, man. It's like it's boring to me, and hard to get. And I don't know why that is. It's just, I was never into politics. Maybe just because the politics in this country is absolutely horrible, and I've just always stayed away from it. And
are you based in the US or is
I'm
this country a different?
I'm in Ireland. So, and I'm in Northern Ireland, which is obviously.
You're not tell by listening to him.
Well, he may have moved. He may. So, politics in this country is also bad in America. I just didn't know if it was bad in Ireland or if you were referring to the US or what. So
it's probably worse. There's only like 6 million people.
Yeah, so I have a lot to say on that.
Hold your thoughts on governance for a minute till I catch up on questions, and then we'll jump to governance if that's okay.
Sure.
We talked a bit about development in that, but if you were building again, and you mentioned you may be rebuilding the contracts at some point, would you build them in Icon, or is it Aiken or Icon?
Yeah. So almost absolutely. As it stands, I think, Plutus wastes a lot of resources. And, there's been some comparisons between like the execution units of Aiken and Plutus. And to some extent, it's an unfair comparison because the same optimizations that Aiken is taking advantage of could very well be implemented in a future version of Plutus, right? So Plutus will come down over time as well. It's just, Aiken got there first, and they're getting to kind of show off some of that. Helios, I think, is also showing those off. There's a bunch. I can't keep up with them. I really like the people behind Aiken. I really like the ergonomics of the language. I really like the compiler. I haven't actually submitted a pull request, but I've been doing some hacking on contributing to the Aiken compiler. I'm not going to commit Sundaeswap to anything, but there is a very good chance that we will end up rebuilding the V. See, okay, I never know whether to call it V2 or V3 because we just had this big marketing push around V2 Sundaeswap UI, which is really just rebuilding the UI. And so now we're going to have like the V2 of the contracts, and that's going to be really confusing. Like, didn't you just release a V2? So
I'm going to say, next release from Sundaeswap is V3.
Okay,
V3.
so
there.
Looking at the V3 contracts, right, we're kind of going to skip a version, but that is the strongest possibility is that we will build them in Aiken, and I'm really loving that language. That being said, it is still very early on in its development process, and today, would I launch a protocol built in Aiken? Probably not. I think it's too early just from my own kind of ethical ability to sleep at night standard. I want to see it pressure tested a lot more and a lot more auditing and tooling around fuzzing the language and things like that. But given that, starting now, there's a long runway to build those contracts, I think it has a very good chance of being there by the time that we're ready to launch that. So that's one that I have my eye on very, very keenly. Yeah.
Nice. I think we're nearly caught up on the comments here now as well. And this one about about Hydra and integration with dApps. We covered this a little bit, and in our video today, we go a lot more into Hydra and how it could be integrated. So we won't get into it here because we're starting to get on in time. And I need to hand it over to Paddy for all his topics. 56 Hope Road is driving. So how's it going? And welcome. I know another person who is here every week. Stablecoins are key to liquidity in the ecosystem. Definitely. Jed still isn't the solution or the long-term solution right now, for me anyway, unless they find more ways to incentivize Shen. We see what happened this week when $900,000 worth of Jed was minted, and it brought the reserve ratio down under 400%, and the drop in price today hasn't helped that either. So I think it's a really interesting development, and I hold some Shen, but I don't see right now enough of incentive for people to be minting Shen or to take the risk of minting it. But hopefully that can be worked out, because a decentralized stablecoin like that is something that could be really powerful going forward.
It's definitely useful, you know. I'm glad we have it. Wouldn't ridicule it that way. But I just see, and people have seen my opinions on the Shen rewards and this and that, and I don't think it's great. But you know, but the whole idea of it there, of the stable coin being available, is awesome. You know, we've cried out for years wanting one, so we have one. And now that we have one, it's not good enough. You know that way. It's the way it works, isn't it?
And I'm not trying to downplay what has been built there. I think
I did.
I think it is really good. And when we get, I think it's version 1.3 or 5, I'm not sure which one, when we get the next version of Jed and it'll become more complex and dynamic fees. And I think it definitely will get better. And I hope to see the
I'm really curious. I'm really curious to see how that impacts. Like, is that going to be just a new token, and every Jed holder like needs to go through some like migration process, or did they build into the smart contracts the ability to upgrade that and like change the minting mechanism behind Jed? And if so, who controls that? So that's a really interesting thing that I want to keep my eye on going forward, because the UX of like every time they want to release something, having to have a new coin that now you have like 6 different Jeds in your wallet, and you're trying to pay with one of them. It's a nightmare. But also like centralizing control of the minting policy for this token is pretty terrifying.
Yeah,
I think, and this isn't to be held to it, I think the contracts are upgradable, and I would presume it is Coty has that control. But whenever I get Shahaf back on again, that's definitely a question I need to put to him. So Alex is here, but yeah, if we had a USDT or USDC stablecoin in the ecosystem, then we probably would be a lot stronger if people could trade in and out of stablecoins more. We do have IUSD from Indigo as well, which is another great one to have in the system. And I think when we get USDA from Emergo, I don't know if initially it was a Q1 launch, but I think with things that happened with USDC and some regulations that might have been pushed, I haven't heard updates on it, but I think that definitely will help the ecosystem too. Roki just talks about how high the TVL went in 2022 when, in terms of DeFi, we didn't have a huge amount on Cardano apart from DEXs was really all we had. We're starting to see a lot more now with money markets coming out and others building on the side. I have
a question there for you guys on the Jed side. So we have a circulating supply of 4.2 is it million 4.2 million Jed.
Yeah,
you know, there's people out there who transact that amount on a daily basis on Ethereum, say. You know, it's still tiny, you know, compared to what we see in other ecosystems. You know, what I don't understand is how we're going to get to that capacity without people, you know, feeling confident in Shen. You know, what is it going to take for us to be able to have that confidence? You know, I have some, it's fine, but I'm also a supporter, which is more, I'm doing a lot of Cardano support, so I have that emotional connection. We're going to need people in there who's not emotionally connected to Cardano, but they want to say, well, this is going to incentivize myself. So what do you guys think?
Yeah, I think the uphill battle that Jed is fighting is it's its biggest strength and biggest downside, which is the 400% collateralization. Because if you think about that, right, USDC, I just looked it up, has a circulating supply of $31 billion, right? So if we take $31 billion and we say, okay, that has to be, if we wanted 31 billion JED in circulation, and we collateralize that by 4, that's 1.24 trillion. Or wait, did I do that wrong? I think 31.
That's at the current valuation of ADA.
Yeah, $124 billion of locked ADA, right? And never mind that much ADA doesn't exist at the current value, right? So this would have to be, okay, the price of ADA goes up significantly, and then you can have that amount locked, but like, you know, it's a really heavy locking requirement, right, for it. So I think the way that as an ecosystem we solve this is, you know, the reason JED has that high collateralization is because it's supposed to be a very low risk algorithmic stablecoin. And I think by pebbling that and by having the gradient of like more risky positions like IUSD, where the collateralization ratio is like 110, 120%, and other types of things, and spreading that out, you know, we may not ever have one stable coin that reaches that level of circulating supply, you know, unless it's a centralized, we can just mint whatever the USD that's locked up is, right? And so we can back it 1-to-1 and really cut that that collateralization very low. But like that's really the dynamic that is at play here.
And the way that I always see a lot of Twitter messages of people saying about Binance. Say Binance decide to use JED. I feel as if they wouldn't, you know, and that's simply because, okay, if they want to use it, they got to have a process where someone has to invest in chain for them to use JED. Now, maybe they'll do it themselves. You know, maybe the process would be that they have to put the chain in and then they could start using JED. But it sort of makes it not as easily usable as you would expect. So if I was maybe a customer or something, and I want to integrate JED into my application or whatever I'm doing with it, another centralized exchange, they've got to invest massively in chain. So it's sort of a catch, you know, sort of a blocker, but I understand the benefit of it for safety.
Yeah, and if Binance were to invest in Shen, for example, then they're not minting JED that they need to be able to trade on their platform, right? So it's, you know, they want to invest in Shen for the reserve, to increase the reserve ratio and get those rewards, but then they also need to mint some JED so that they can like have that liquidity for executing trades on their centralized exchange. So I think JED is a really fantastic project, and the research behind it is really sound, but it does have that uphill climb compared to something like USDC.
Yeah, it is growing, you know, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the last few, I see Will said that we missed his, so I'm going back to look.
Paul.
Questions come flying in, and I... Sorry, Will, hope you're still there, but this was yours. In your opinion, why doesn't ADA stock price reflect all the good that it seems to be doing? Rarely does cryptocurrencies, what they're actually doing and building, rarely does that reflect in the price. A lot of times, crypto prices now are reflected on hype or hopium of where things can go. I think as more regulation comes in, and over the next few years, we will start to see that cryptos that are building something and doing real work will start to be valued more. Like the stock market, things will slow down. We won't have these massive, like you look at 10% gain or drop in the cryptocurrency market in a day. It's like, yeah, it's crypto. That kind of thing can happen. But I think in 5 years' time, that type of stuff won't happen. And that's when the real valuations start to come into it, and what is actually being produced by the coins set the price a lot more.
Yeah, and I think another factor that plays into this, I just also have to take a moment to strike out that word stock, because ADA isn't a stock. But the ADA price also reflects the fact that ADA is dramatically more retail distributed than other chains, meaning there's a lot more supply in the hands of the average investor that's not necessarily, that has, I think that provides it some strong support because people are, here for the culture. They're not likely to sell. They're trying to, see their bags pump. But it also means they can't move the price dramatically by buying, right? Retail investors have a lot less capital to move the market. But yeah, like Paul said, I also think that the price of anything is magic fairy money about what people value it at, right? And so I think that sometimes you see some correlation, but oftentimes it's somewhat arbitrary. So
nice. Paddy, anything to add? And then I'm going to hand it over to you, as I think I've covered everything. If I haven't,
it's just crypto.
Shout.
It is crypto, and that's the way it works. No one will ever understand it. But what I would say is, what you'll notice is that's been happening. It's a wee bit technical analysis bit at the minute. Over the past couple of years, you'll notice things don't fluctuate as much anymore. You sort of would have seen 30%, 40% daily fluctuations on certain things. I don't see them happening as much. So it's maturing, I think. And the likes of Bitcoin and Cardano and Ethereum, these top 10, level 1, the main guys, they will get leveled out pretty quickly by people trading. So it's, and the true value, nobody knows what they are. It's basically whatever someone's willing to pay. So it is crypto at the end of the day. And it's like anything. You look at the normal stocks and shares. You look at Tesla. Look how much look at the price of Tesla compared to Volkswagen. Which is the bigger company? Volkswagen. But which has got the bigger stock price? Tesla. Why is that? Because there's more hype. Volkswagen sell 10 times the cars of Tesla. But why is their stock not as high? There's loads and loads of different things in all these things. So Tesla's more trendy, I guess, than Volkswagen. All these things come into play.
Yeah, I think I've caught up on everything. I think there was some comments mentioned in the where was it? I've lost the comment now, but talking about the limit swaps that are on some dexes, and I know Sundaeswap have added that in as well. That's something that you don't kind of have across other chains, really. It's something that on Cardano probably will grow over time. People are used to using AMM dexes where you just have your market orders, but limit orders, it's nice to have both options. I think that was all of the comments. If I have missed anything else, do let me know. Paddy, what's up next?
All right. I'm gonna break it up a bit and do something a little bit fun and get your guys' take on how Gary did this week, and then we'll come back with the banner. Just to have a little bit of crack, as we say in Ireland. So, as everybody's seen, Gary Gensler got absolutely murdered this week.
I haven't actually watched any of that coverage.
Oh man, it's amazing.
It's worth watching.
Okay, cool.
It is fun, and he had 2 friends or so at the beginning, but every other, I don't really know who's from which sort of team who talked to. I don't know anybody on the panel, but most of them all ripped them apart. And I was watching a bit where they were questioning him about what is Ethereum. Is it a commodity? Is it a security? And he didn't answer. He didn't give a definition. And he kept for 5 minutes. The guy basically asked him, "What is it?" And you would think the guy who's head of the SEC would have an opinion on it, because there is no doubt in my mind they have talked about Ethereum at some point in some of their meetings. Otherwise, what are they doing? So and if anybody hasn't watched, the Wolf of Wall Street has all the videos on. I'm going to Paul's Twitter. He has some of them on there. It's an amazing watch. But the reason I want to bring it up too is you want to get your guys' opinion on, and it's more, and especially for yourself, Pat, because it's sort of being States. you know, there's this narrative the states are attacking, and they talked about this with Gary. And there's one guy, and I'm probably going to guess he might be a Republican. And just because he brought up China, and I'm like, oh, that guy might be a Republican. Because he'll not want to have China have something that he doesn't have or did have. So, so I was thinking to myself,
generally, if he was angry or okay, I don't know what your audience is. I'm fairly left leaning. Generally, I, try to bridge the gap. So take that in mind with what I'm about to say. But individually, if you're on the right, we could probably have a conversation. But generally in politics, what I've found is that if they're angry or they sound dumb, they're probably Republican.
Okay. I just thought it's like the way that I seen it was he talked about that China is now opening to crypto, and you, Gary, are making crypto leave America. And what are you going to do about it? It's like, so now it's going to be used as a political pawn. I never thought we would have got to the point in crypto, but it was probably inevitable in that because China now want it, America's going to want it back.
I think this one here was about, this is the one where they were talking about that he taught the course on blockchain and finance, and it turns out that he never owned any cryptocurrency. Well, he says he never owned any cryptocurrency. I do find that extremely hard to believe that someone who was teaching about blockchain a few years ago at this point, that he didn't get interested enough to come in and even try out the blockchain. Even if he didn't believe in Bitcoin, it was the predominant chain. And he's been heard talking about Algorand a few times now because he's friends with, name is gone, still the Algorand founder.
Yeah.
Name, I'm drawing a blank. But he's talked about him in a few things and saying about how great the technology is there and what he's built and what you could build on top of it. So I do find it hard to believe that he hasn't tried it out himself.
Yeah, I agree. It seems a little suspicious, but also maybe not as suspicious as most people might think. I know there's plenty of people at IOG working on Cardano itself who have never owned. Other than maybe like the wallet that they received as the part of their employment package that is just sitting in their desk drawer. I know there's a lot of people out there who really like to, are really interested in the tech and just, couldn't care less about the finance side of it. So yeah, a little surprising, especially at such a high level and but maybe not as surprising as you might think.
Okay.
Yeah, so he regulates crypto, doesn't buy any, has never held any, doesn't have any wallets. So it's a bit like, how can he be protecting anybody? That was another question. The other thing they said, he's protecting the public from, crypto because it's a highly speculative asset. And they're like, people can access it no matter what. So they're not quite sure how he's protecting it.
Yeah, here's the answer I've given in terms of regulation in the past, and it's something I stand by. I think the goals of regulation and the SEC, et cetera, are ones that we can all get behind, right? Prevent money laundering, prevent terrorism funding, and protect the consumer from scams. I think that's why regulation exists. And for most industries, if you point at a regulation, I'll point at the blood that's spilled to create it, right? I think that part of, and I'm willing to extend the SEC, for example, the benefit of the doubt and that that's what they're trying to achieve. I think what happened is the SEC thought that Bitcoin was a fad for a very long time, and they ignored it for a very long time. And so crypto became this big thing, and they're kind of trying to play catch up in trying to understand it and trying to figure out how to regulate it. And they feel like they need a very big hammer to do so. What I would love to see in the years forward is crypto trying to work with regulators to say, hey, how can we solve these problems with technology, right? How can we work together to protect people from rug pulls and from scams and from hacks and things like that? because the embarrassing aspect of the industry that we are in is there's 10, 100, 50 million hacks every single day across almost every chain, right? Cardano hasn't had any major hacks yet, but it's coming. Like, we're not immune. And in any other industry, that would just be unacceptable, right? It would be, if Wall Street was losing people's money like once a week at that scale, it just never would have existed, right? And so we have to take responsibility for that. We can't just say SEC bad, SEC wants to come and take our toys, right? Like, we have created a dangerous instrument and we have not followed through on, deburring those edges, right? But I do also think that the heavy-handed, like, let's just try to shove it back in Pandora's box and say nobody can do it, is also not a productive way to solve that either.
Don't do crypto. Is their solution to crypto? It's like, no, man, it's not going to work.
Yeah, crypto is going to happen, but we do need some regulation into it. But the need to bring in regulation that doesn't stifle innovation, and you start to see even Coinbase during the week are talking about moving out of the US if things continue the way they're going. And Coinbase, whether you like them or not, they have been an entity that have been around a long time. Brian Armstrong has been a solid person in the cryptocurrency community and trying to do a lot of good in the industry, I think. And they have said they will come out and try and fight the recent letter they got from the SEC. And even if they lose, hopefully it will bring clarification. Like, look what happened with Kraken, where, again, Jesse Powell is someone who I would say is a very good actor within the crypto space, has been around. I think Kraken was one of the first exchanges, well, after Mt. Gox and everything there. But again, I would put class as a good actor in the space, wasn't really given much of a chance to come back out. And if they did want to register what they had, where could they go? It's like Hester Pierce came out and said that, and her response to it was like, if they say they should have registered as securities, but if they want to actually register as securities, is the process in place? And I don't think any of that is clear. And when you listen to the one with Gary on now, Holy Macaroni says that he listened to all 5 hours. I only listened to the few clips that were shared around Twitter, and they were good enough for me. But there's the one where it's basically asking Gary, is Ethereum a security? And he keeps going around it, tiptoeing around it, and saying that it's all very clear. It's very clearly defined of what is and what isn't. And he's asked the same question 3 or 4 times, is Ethereum one? And he said, well, I think if you look at all the definitions, then it's going to be very clear what it is, but he won't say it. And that's exactly what's happening in so many areas, is that they keep pointing you back towards this documentation that doesn't take into account the evolving technology or what cryptocurrency is. It's still trying to categorize it in the old way. And that's where we need people like Charles and others in the industry to stand up and get involved in the different regulation that is going to come, that they can still get the best out of innovation and not be scared of losing power. That's the way it looks a lot of the time.
And hey, I've never had to sit in a congressional testimony, so maybe the pressure and the anxiety of giving clear answers that are going to come back to bite you in the ass, maybe that was at play here. But that definitely seems like something he of all people should have been able to give a clear answer on, specifically, or should have been prepared to give a clear answer on.
Yeah.
And I would just summarize it and say, the way it feels to me is the US is currently anti-crypto. And I think it is all coming from Gary not having the right tactic. Europe and some European countries, specifically Portugal, and then the United Kingdom, are opening up are making crypto companies more welcome. Now, may change in the future. European Union is a strange beast. God knows what could come out of those guys. But at the minute, it seems they're welcoming it and they're happy to be innovative. The current Prime Minister of the UK, Rishi Sunak, he had created multiple pro-crypto initiatives when he was the Chancellor, which is the finance guy. of the United Kingdom, and it seems like they're going different paths. So I'd like to see Gary, maybe chill out a bit and work with crypto. Like Brian Armstrong said something a couple of weeks ago, when they got the notice from the SEC, was that they have been trying to get information from them for months. Basically, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. What do you guys think? And they wouldn't tell them, or they wouldn't give them guidance on whether or not these initiatives they were going to be doing were good or bad compared to what, according to the SEC. So it's like, then when you tell them, they know you're doing something, and then they come back to you and sue you. So it's like, am I best off not telling you because you don't know if I'm doing something wrong? And if I ask you if I'm doing something wrong, then you sue me because I'm asking you. It's like so confusing. Even saying it is so confusing. So it's like, I can understand why Coinbase have come out and said, we're fighting this. This.
I'm just going to kind of take a side note because I see a question from Max Zulu in the chat.
I'm going to go to that one next. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Sunday tokens are available at iso.sundaeswap.finance, have been since early December. When you say you reached out to Sunday support, the only way that we support people are through contact@sundaeswap.finance, our email, or through opening a ticket on our Discord. Sounds like you found somebody on Twitter pretending to be support that was trying to steal your seed phrase or trick you in some way there. Maybe if you did open a support ticket on Discord, we were just misunderstanding the question, but would invite you to come back and try that again. And I'll make sure to look out for that. But yeah, they're available to self-claim from iso.sundaeswap.finance. And yeah, I just wanted to clear that out and say, everybody, please be careful of scams. One big one that's been going around is there is, I think, a Telegram bot that's pretending to be us, that's tricking people to deposit a lot of TRX. We've never done anything on the Tron chain. And just because something looks like us does not mean it is us. Make sure you check our official Twitter, the follower count, check our website, we'll announce it there, things like that. So just always please be careful of scams.
Yeah, and I would say that goes for every project out there. No legitimate project is ever going to ask you for your seed phrase, because there's no reason they should ever need full control of your wallet like that. If you give them your seed phrase, that means that they can clear out your wallet. Now, we talked about the claim, I think, at the very end of our call today, but you can't claim it from the Sundaeswap one. What did you say it was? By iso.sundaeswap.finance,
yeah.
Yeah, so and when you go in there, you just connect your wallet and you should be able to claim at that point.
Yeah, and there's a link to that from our main website, sundaeswap.finance. So should be easy to find the authoritative one. So yeah, you just connect your wallet and then you claim. So
awesome,
perfect.
Cool. Sorry, I didn't mean to deviate, but I think that was an important.
No, I was going to highlight that one because I think it's important, even just to say about the seed phrase, that no one will ever need your seed phrase.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, security is massively important. And one thing I would say is, if there's anybody who has ever any questions, and I'm sure you guys would be the same, feel free to send us a message or tag us anything on Twitter. I get a lot of guys messaging me about different things, and I go, nope, scam. I'm happy enough to respond to anybody. If they're feeling as if there's something wrong or something, then reach out, ask somebody, because most of the time it probably is dodgy. If you're getting that feeling and then you click the button that makes something send, it's gone. Ask someone before you do that.
Yeah, and I'll also say to that, I'm always happy to answer questions, but something, I guess, I don't know if this has happened to you, but I think there's like some threshold on Twitter of like, once your account becomes popular enough, it doesn't notify you of every tag that you get. Because there's been a bunch of people who have been like, I've been tagging you on this to try to get this question answered, and you haven't responded. And I'm just not seeing every tag anymore because I get tagged a lot, I guess. So, but I do try to respond to the ones that I see.
Yeah, they do a filtery thing. I don't know what it is. And it must happen once you get to a certain amount. And it's also down to their account as well, is what I found out. So they have to have certain levels themselves. So it is part of the algo, I would say. All right, so it was good talking about Gary. I'm just going to move on to one, and it's to get your opinion on this, guys, and you can jump in. So it's all to do with our wonderful world of Cardano NFTs.
If you zoom in a small bit there, Paddy, people will be able to read it.
Oh yeah, I
Control
forgot.
plus.
So what's been going on in the world of NFTs? It's always fun and dramatic. I love watching it. So I guess I'll tell you a long story, but quite short. Over the past couple of months, you've had a lot of projects complaining about help. You've had a lot of projects about, how do they get funding, how do they get engagement from the community, how do they get advertising, how do they get talking to the people that be so they can, promote their project and get things going. And then it moved on to, there's no liquidity in Cardano. There's nothing. There's no money. There's no people buying NFTs. And NFT sales did drop. That's fine. That's understandable. Things, go up and down. And now what we're seeing is constantly seeing as the big drama is all Cardano NFT projects are moving to Polygon. Okay, great. And that's what some people might do that. Some people might not. A lot of projects will stay and they will continue building. We know that's going to happen. And I wanted to get you guys' thoughts. So there was a tweet went out from one of these NFT creators saying that they're moving to Polygon and they got all this great help and they got this, they got that, they got investment help, marketing help, NFT help, developing mobile app help, all this help. Great, sounds marvelous. And Sebastian came along and and offered himself, and says, well, I can help you doing this, and this. I wanted to get your guys' take on, this whole thing. And especially from yourself, Pat, you've been through the process of releasing maybe not an NFT project per se, in the sense of what these guys are trying to do, but an actual project. It has a lot of very, very similar. It's very similar in what you do. So what do you guys think? Is it something that there is a problem on Cardano? Do we need some sort of... Now, I'm not saying IOG or Cardano Foundation should be responsible for this, and I don't want them responsible for this. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, so obviously it's a bit different because I'm pretty distant from NFTs. I think sometimes they're interesting, but I'm not a big degen or anything like that. But in general, what I would say is, I think, Patrick also does this outreach where anybody can reach out to him. And so I think that's great that they're doing that. I think there is a vacuum for this kind of experience in Cardano. And I think part of why that vacuum doesn't exist on Polygon is because they see it as a huge investment. And so they're spending the money to do it. And so they, see an opportunity to steal a lot of the Cardano market share. And it's I think, very targeted and very I'm trying to be careful about what I say, right? Because I don't want to piss anybody off. I am a very positive person. I think Polygon's cool. I think all other chains are cool, so long as they're not active scams. But I think it is, a bit, and this is just my personal kind of gut feeling, is that it's a bit taking advantage of an opportunity to poach some of the Cardano community. And so it takes a lot of money to provide those services and to provide like really skilled people at routing, right? So I think my experience in Cardano has been that there is a lot of people that are super willing to be helpful and super like nice and kind and will have a conversation. And like, because it's not part of their core job, they're not being paid a high salary to do only that. It like that energy diffuses into like all of the stuff they're trying to juggle, right? So like the Cardano Foundation is great and they're doing a lot of really great stuff. But some of the conversations that I had with them, especially early on, it's kind of changed as we've kind of cemented, but early on we would have conversations and it like wouldn't necessarily go anywhere. I think there's also a big fear within those entities. Given that they are founding entities, they're really worried about playing favorites and really worried about like, if I help this project, is that going to be playing favorites because we don't have the capacity to help everybody, right? And so, there's this impression that Sundaeswap got a lot of special treatment from IOG, and that's very much not the case. That almost every meeting that we tried to have with them, they were like, well, we can't lend you developers because we can't lend developers to everybody and things like that. And like, I think because of the focus on Sundaeswap, there was maybe a little bit near the end of them kind of saying, okay, well, we got to help you because the reputation of Cardano hinges on you and things like that. But largely they try to stay aloof because they recognize the power that they have as founding entities, right? And so, I personally wouldn't mind if they did devote some resources to that or made a treasury proposal to do that. I don't think it's a death knell to have IOG or the Cardano Foundation in particular helping. I also don't think it's a death knell to have any other organization helping. I've seen some sentiment in the community of like, oh, but that wouldn't be decentralized. And, and I think that sometimes we fall victim to like a cult of decentralization, of like decentralization being the end goal. But I think as a, if you want to on-ramp people, having one clear, unambiguous place to go to do that on-ramping as a project is a huge value add, and decentralizing it diffuses and dilutes the effectiveness of that. So, I think it's a very complex and nuanced conversation. And then the last thing that I want to add about this is I think it's really important to draw the distinction between projects that are leaving Cardano for another chain and projects that are expanding to another chain. And every project's going to say that they're expanding to another chain, but you have to look at their actions. Look, do they continue to build on Cardano as well as building on this other chain? Do they circle back? Do they have a cohesive vision for how it all fits together? And I think that's really important. And, if a project is fed up with Cardano and leaves, I'm not in their shoes, so I don't know what led to that decision. And, I'm always somebody who's going to give people the benefit of the doubt. But I do think that is a very different perspective than somebody who's saying, hey, the world that we live in, like part of the central founding thesis of Cardano and why it's architected this way is interoperability between chains. And so if you see projects start to like lay into and build that interoperability or utilize that interoperability, like you can't be hypocritical about like that's part of why Cardano exists, is to be that hub for a bunch of different ecosystems. So
yeah, I think that's an important point on the difference between moving to another chain or expanding, and where the development, if all the development moves to another chain.
Oh, did we lose Paul?
I think we have. Lost him.
Or he's playing a really elaborate practical joke on
variegated phrasing. I guess something happened there. But anyways, the one thing I would say on the whole NFT scene, and I think it's massively important to Cardano and to most blockchain ecosystems, I think they get left behind in the whole Project Catalyst area. Most of that is projects, and I'd like to see some derivative for NFTs to give them something, because you look at the communities these guys build, it's massive.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because on the one hand, I definitely agree, you want to see NFT representation there, and you want to like, how can Cardano promote that space and the community that they bring to the table? But on the other hand, NFTs also have the easiest time raising funds, right? The what they build, and this is not a knock, what they build is less tech, more art, right? And so that's art and community, and that's really hard to build. But and maybe I'm biased as somebody who builds protocols and builds software. I think it is a lot harder to bring to market a protocol that is stable and reliable and audited and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
And at the same time, right? So I think it's more expensive to like get to the starting line as a project than it is as an NFT, right? Yeah. Even if you kind of launch something simple and you would grow from there, it's easier to get to the starting line for an NFT. It's also easier for them to make money because the frantic sales, right? So like you see these NFT drops and it's 3-4 mil because they sold for 30 ADA each, and so it's like conversely also really easy. It's easier for them to raise money than for a project, especially, you know, something like an open source project that is like a community good that's, you know, not productizable, not something that you're selling. And so I think that's at least the dynamic that's fed into Catalyst kind of underrepresenting NFTs. Is it's like, okay, you're good. You're like, you're managing yourself. You're doing well. You're growing as an ecosystem. We don't need to help you. Whereas projects, we do need to help you.
Yeah.
But I do absolutely think that there are interesting opportunities for getting NFTs represented in Catalyst and saying, you know, more, I would have liked to see more NFT projects at the Colorado Summit, for example.
Yeah.
You know, Patrick, who's a minting platform, was there to kind of represent that that community, but there were no like founders of NFT projects there, and I thought that was a big gap. As great as and as much effort as went into planning that, you know, fantastic. But you know, sometimes you're going to drop a ball somewhere, and so. Yeah, I don't necessarily think we need to be throwing a lot of money at NFTs because I think they're doing great there. Maybe the smaller ones, maybe we figure out how to help smaller projects that are bringing something to the table or whatever. But I think just to like understand and wrap our head around how that dynamic arose, it's not just like us leaving them out into the cold. You know what I mean?
I will finish it off and say, you know, it's an open market, okay? And if there is a business to be made there, there's likely someone will facilitate maybe a launch pad, maybe something along those lines that will encompass all these benefits that Polygon are doing. And it, in my mind, it shouldn't be the IOG or Cardano Foundation facilitating this. They don't, in my mind, own Cardano and shouldn't be the ones that have to make you buy into using it. It should be their own NFTs decision. Cardano NFT
certainly not IOG. If anybody, like Cardano Foundation, that's their purpose, their founding kind of mandate is to promote the Cardano ecosystem. So I could see it having a role there, but certainly, you know, expecting IOG to do this as a software company is a big ask.
Yeah. You'll see what happens. Cardano Foundation will begin helping people, then people will say they're helping these guys, why they're helping me, and then it escalates into a big massive thing. But I wanted to bring that point up because I think it's, you know, and especially with yourself here, and you've been through a similar, a lot more technical process that, you know, people do this on their own, you know, and a lot of people have managed to successfully do this. So I don't think it's the end of NFTs on Cardano, that's for sure. All right. I guess Paul must be having an outage. So let me just jump over to our one or two last topics. So
we never did get to discuss governance, so we could loop back to that if you wanted.
Yeah, I want to do that, and I was probably going to use that a bit of a segue from this one, on the whole governance, because let me just stop sharing this or to have, let me see, I might have something on governance. 1 second. No, we just have a thoughts. Okay, no link today on that. So one area, and this is going to help, and I know, and everybody is probably seeing that you've been heavily involved.
Hey, welcome, Paul.
Welcome back, Paul.
I got rugged.
No worries. What is this, Twitter Spaces?
Yeah, I know. My router restarted here. I don't know why. So it took me off for a few minutes there, but I'm not sure what I missed.
No worries. We just talked about Catalyst and why NFTs are underrepresented in Catalyst for a little bit. We were about to move back to Paddy. Were you going to talk about governance or something else first?
Yep. No, we're going to governance, and the NFT one sort of gives me a good segue into it. So, and this is probably a good topic of discussion too. The NFT guys have also are saying they're not being represented in the whole governance thing, and I'm seeing people questioning. I haven't seen anything against yourself, and I give off to a guy who was saying that Rick is doing all these bad things in his own free time, you know, running workshops and doing, you know, educating people and helping write sort of documents at X, Y, and Z. And there's people out there was ridiculing him as if he's doing something bad or as if Rick is trying to take over Cardano. And I'm going to myself, do people need more education on this? But anyways, the one area that annoyed me and that I was thinking about, the NFT guys think they're not representative, as if they're not part of governance. You know, they're not welcome. And I'm going, well, everybody's part of governance. You know, so I don't know where this has come from, and I don't know if you've seen it. I don't know if you've witnessed it.
Yeah, so obviously governance is something that I've been really passionate about, trying to get really involved in, trying to mediate good, healthy discussion. I think it would be, and so I have a lot of thoughts here, so it may come off as a little bit disorganized, but first let's address that NFT question, right? So I think what you said is absolutely right. The discussion is now out on Twitter and open. If you want to be involved, you can be, right? The proposal is being discussed both on GitHub and the Cardano forum and on Twitter. I do think I understand where the sentiment comes from, though, in the sense that, you know, it kind of started off on a bad foot with not really much NFT representation at the workshop. But at the end of the day, there was a finite number of seats that IOG could fit people into a room that would be productive. And so I do think that was a small misstep on their part. And I can see why that kind of seeded a frustrating feeling within the NFTs communities of hey, why were we left out at this initial discussion? Especially when the thought was that workshop was governance. But I think that the more that we have these discussions on Twitter and the more that we engage with people and iterate on, and IOG accepts feedback about this proposal or new proposals get written, that feeling, hopefully we're dismantling that and we are including you, right? And so if there is any NFT projects out there that are feeling excluded from Twitter, reach out to me. I'm happy to have a conversation and amplify your voice. And you know, if you have something constructive to add to the conversation, you know, let me know. And even if it's not something I agree with, I'll amplify that because I think the discussion itself has merit in pulling on those levers and trying to figure out what can we accomplish and what can we accomplish reasonably and all that kind of stuff. So absolutely understand where that's coming from. But I think the reality is different. In terms of governance itself, one thing that I always like to try to emphasize, one thing that I'm seeing that is really disappointing is in some cases, I think drama farming of how can I get the most outraged so I get the most engagement so that I can, you know, I'm going to be a little bit disparaging here. I think there is one or two people in the ecosystem, and I won't name names, who are approaching this as how can, let me role play as if IOG is a totalitarian government and I'm hiding in a bunker, as a freedom fighter. And I think that is just an incredibly unproductive addition to the conversation. I also think a level below that is people who are genuinely concerned and trying to raise a alarm about something that they see as a dramatic infringement of rights or a huge mistake that's about to happen. And I do my best to reach out to those people and engage in conversation with those, because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is not a country government that is going to be deciding what is illegal, that is going to be making decisions about your healthcare, about your basic human rights, except outside of what's encoded into the protocol. The stakes here, I think, are very different, important, but very different than we're used to thinking about government as. Yep. And so part of why I don't understand or don't agree with the alarmism that some people feel, and again, I'm not undercutting that perspective, except for the one or two people I think are doing so in bad faith. I think there's plenty of people who are legitimately concerned and scared. Yeah. And my hand reaching out to them would be, we're talking about a very narrow set of what we're going to be deciding via governance. Mm-hmm. So isn't it possible that the stakes are different here and the dynamics at play are different here, where if if we adopted SIP 1694 as the US government or the government in Northern Ireland, I'm sure it would be a shit show. I'm sure it would lead to human rights abuses and a totalitarian surveillance state, blah, 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 everything that people are afraid of. But in terms of a transnational blockchain that fundamentally is just how do we maintain this ledger state, and not even talking about governing the rules of that, but just like how do we tweak some parameters? How do we pay out of this treasury to fund future development? Maybe let's take it down a notch and say, okay, if you disagree with it, that's one thing, but you don't need to act like it's, or I would encourage you to self-analyze those feelings of the world is ending and determine if those are justified.
Can I
and then go ahead.
If you ask you a quick question on the whole thing, and just so people understand, where are we in the government process? If you could try and articulate that to give those.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Where are we? Where is it at?
So depending on how you look at that story, I think we are somewhere between 5% in to less than 0.1% in.
Okay.
Right. In the sense of like, okay, so here's the timeline that has been outlined by IOG and by the community for governance. We had the workshop in Colorado to try to kickstart the discussion because, IOG had published a proposal, a SIP 1694, quite a few months back and got very low engagement on it. So they're like, hey, how do we get people talking about this? Let's bring a bunch of community members here to figure out what the interesting questions are, right? And so that's what the Longmont workshop that I attended in Colorado is. And it was just a bunch of, we literally didn't answer a single question. We said, what are the interesting questions to ask? And we the way I pictured it is we churned up the riverbed floor by sticking our fingers into the mud. And so the water got very cloudy. There's lots of activity. We came away from that and we started discussions on Twitter. We started Twitter Spaces. We started discussions on the forums, on GitHub, etc. And that's what's ongoing right now. It's lots of, now that we've kicked up a bunch of questions, are there questions in the wider community that we missed? And how do we start making progress on these discussions and these questions that we did have, right? And iterating on that proposal and seeing what new proposals get written. So there's a SIP 1776. And so I would encourage everybody to go read that and see what new ideas it brings to the table. So there's that. The next stage, and IOG just announced this yesterday, is more workshops that are community run. So there's it's one thing to have a whole discussion on Twitter. Now let's start making it more concrete. Let's start distilling out the sediment, having workshops where we say, okay, we're going to put pen to paper, answer these questions with a group of people, either virtually or in person. I'll take the opportunity to announce here, I plan on applying for that program and running kind of my own personal workshop in New York City for a day-long workshop for talking about governance and tackling some of these problems. Awesome. So I'll announce more details on that if I get kind of the IOG funding. But I think that would be really cool. But I hope we see those all over the world. Yeah. Then we're going to kind of close that out. And this is on this is where I see it as the 5% arc of okay, the Twitter discussions are in that first 5%. The bulk of the interesting stuff is going to be in those workshops and in filtering out from the Twitter discussions and the GitHub discussions and the forum discussions and anywhere else people are having discussions, filter that out into deliverable artifact documents, suggestions to IOG to update this, new different proposals, drafts for the Constitution, satellite SIPs that aren't directly related to that, but like the one that I'm working on. What metadata do we attach to these actions so that we can build rich tooling in the ecosystem, right? So we'll see that start to distill down. And then IOG is going to host another of these workshops to close out the arc and say, let's bring a bunch of people back together. It's going to be hosted, I think, over in Europe so that, we hosted one in America. Now let's, make it easier to travel for the people in Europe so we can get some of the same voices, some different voices. Hopefully they'll address some of the gaps that were identified, like bringing more people from the NFT community and things like that, and like close it out and reach some consensus on this is what we're working towards for an MVP governance. Now, the reason why I say it's also like very likely and ideal, in an ideal scenario, we're less than 0.1% of the way into it, is because that's not where it ends. Even launching that governance on chain, it's a minimum viable governance is the term that's become popular. And it is an improvement from where we are, but not the end state. And then we can start voting on funding improvements to that governance, right? So a lot of people are really strongly passionate that at the end of the day, governance should be tied to, one person, one vote. And so how do we fund and start the research to even tackle or think about that problem? That's like a 5-year research effort. As a community, that's something that I think that, we could get behind and fund. But right now, like, it's just never going to happen if we just like hope for it to manifest out of thin air.
Yeah.
Right.
Let me ask you a slightly different question. And this is probably what most people will be wondering, I guess. What are the benefits, or why should I care about governance being part of Cardano?
Very good question.
Say me. Most of the time, I try and stay away from this stuff. And there's people out there who would be the same. And they would go to themselves, well, I don't care. Why should I care?
Yeah. So what I'll say, and this is a point that I was meaning to make earlier, so it's great to circle back to this, is there is a difference between governance, politics, and politics, right? In the sense that governance is how we make decisions, like how we measure community sentiment to make decisions to evolve the blockchain. Politics, in the strictest sense of the definition of the word, is the policies that we enact through governance, discussion and debate about, whether we should pay out of the treasury for this, or whether we should tweak this protocol parameter, etc. And then there's politics, which is the like laborious, screaming past each other, toxic narrative, toxic, thing that has like beast that has taken root in so many of our countries, right? It's in the US, sounds like it's in Northern Ireland as well. And I think it would be a shame to bring governance to Cardano and also bring politics to Cardano.
Oh, yeah.
This politics, right? If we're just talking about like the policies that need to be enacted, I think is important. But like, let's try not to bring the like toxic, bad faith, talk past each other, scream at each other, entrench yourself in a position like exhausting bullshit to this space, right?
Have you ever seen Westminster, UK government?
Mm-hmm.
So their like chambery thing is two sides, just loads and loads of rows of seats, and there's a little speaker part that there's a special name for it or whatever it is. And when one gets up from each side, back and forth, and basically all they do is shout at each other all day.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's great entertainment, but I don't know what they ever achieve, and that's the key point they want to make. And I don't want to see that, because these guys have been doing it for hundreds of years, and they still don't know what they achieve. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A lot of them do that for attention as well, to be like, oh, they're shouting just to be heard.
Yeah.
Man.
And so I've been trying to kind of lead by example, and I would encourage others to do so, of like, let's discuss in good faith. I went through this great exercise when we had the whole contingent staking debate of steel manning. I made, and the only person who can know if you were successful at this, but is yourself. But I made the very best attempt I could to make the absolute strongest argument I could for the other side of an argument. Not, well, I'm going to construct this thing that's easy to dismantle. Really try to get at the heart of what other people were saying and represent that fairly, and to the point that like somebody reading it should almost feel like you are in support of that, right? Make that steelman case and then argue against that. And I think that it's a much harder thing to do, but it is a much more valuable thing to do. And so I would encourage people, if you're kind of debating back and forth, try that as a way to break up these logjams. But bringing it back to the question that you had, because I didn't actually answer your question of like, why should you care about governance? At the end of the day, right now, today in Cardano, there is a 1.5 billion ADA nearly at today's prices, like 75% of $1 billion in a treasury that IOG, Cardano Foundation, and Emergo can spend unilaterally. They could just decide what to do with that. They could decide to spend it on, plushies. They could decide to donate it to political candidates through like signing those transactions. Now, obviously, they don't because of the impacts that would have, but that's a lot of money. And today, there are parameters that control the evolution of the blockchain. Things like block size, execution unit limits that have real material impacts on the dApps that you use and what the blockchain is capable of. And the people that get to decide what those parameters are IOG, the Cardano Foundation, and Emergo, right? And so, for example, Sundaeswap is about to, or just launched our V2 UI. We're about to launch this Zap feature. I talked about this with Paul. Because of the limits of these protocol parameters, we cannot launch with what we call native zaps, which would be cheaper from a cost perspective. And so zaps are going to have to cost 5 ADA each because it's actually 2 transactions that execute back to back. Okay. And so it charges twice the scooper fee. Mm-hmm. And I have no path to trying to change those protocol parameters, right? The community, the Sunday community who wants to pay a lower fee has no path to trying to lower or raise those protocol parameters so that the native Zap functionality that we built into the smart contract can work. Now, it's an oversight and a mistake on our part that it doesn't work natively. Part of that is we had unit tests around it, and those unit tests just weren't with the as big of numbers as we see on the real chain. So it's a small oversight there, but we're in a situation where that is at a dead pass, and IOG, the Cardano Foundation, and Emergo have just decided we're not doing any protocol parameter updates until governance happens. And then finally, today, IOG is building new versions of the chain with improvements like input endorsers and script compression and things like this. And some of those require a hard fork. And unilaterally, the people who get to decide, this one is a little bit different, but at the end of the day, the people who get to decide when that hard fork happens is IOG, Emergo, and the Cardano Foundation. The SPOs have a bit more say in that because if those entities try to trigger the hard fork before the SPOs are ready, it'll be a disaster. But if the SPOs are ready and IOG decides to hold off, they get to make that unilateral decision, right? And so there's real impacts on the improvements to the blockchain that can happen that are in the hands of these 3 founding entities. Yep. And what governance is about is moving those 3 responsibilities into the hands of us, the people using the blockchain and the people with a stake in the blockchain. And so whether you should care about going out and voting on every proposal, not everybody got time for that. But I think you should care about governance as a whole because it will result in a more robust, faster iterating and wider perspective evolution of the Cardano blockchain that I think benefits everybody. So that's the fundamental thesis for why governance matters to me.
Okay. So we got treasury management and better sort of control, would you say, over the enhancements within Cardano. I think they're both massively important. I do.
Yeah.
I really do. And then I guess the other side of it would be, where is it going next? I know you touched on there's going to be workshops and this and that. Is there a time frame? Like, is it going to be? I don't want to say Cardano time, but sometimes Cardano time is a bit longer than what normally happens in the real world. Is it going to be 5 years, 3 years, 1 year, 2 years? What do you think?
So the proposed timeline is for us to have that come back together workshop, reach an agreement of what IOG is going to spend their development resources on in July. And then IOG builds that out and we do maybe an incentivized testnet or some kind of trial run of this governance to make sure that everything is working well in a low risk scenario. And sometime between now like maybe November, and then have like some kind of process currently undecided for measuring, okay, you know, we built all this and we ran the testnet, we know it works. What is the community sentiment behind, can we adopt this or not? And so there will likely be some kind of vote to bootstrap that governance, where we say, hey, all the machinery for having votes is there now. Let's use it to say, is this what we want to officially adopt and enable all of the other features, right? And exactly how that's going to work is still undecided. That'll be like what these workshops are trying to come to, is like, here's the process that we've laid out for kind of the achieving the providence and the legitimacy by showing that the community is largely, there's always going to be disagreement. We're never going to get 100% consensus, but we can demonstrate that the community is largely behind this approach. So that's kind of the timeline. I know IOG really wants it to happen before the end of the year. My guess would be probably like Q1, Q2 next year, we'll have MVG on mainnet.
Awesome. Well, in those topics, those questions that I just asked you, it's like I tried to come at it from a sort of, I'm outside the loop sort of thing, and so people can get involved. And you answered it very well. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. And then I know you could probably talk all night about it, but I was hoping, I was wanting to throw it into the community. Does anybody listening have any questions? Anybody have questions when I put the pie on governance? And then I guess, Paul, do you have any questions on it?
No, I think that was a good overview on it. The main one for me was the timeline and when we will have this, because there's so much other stuff is going to be dependent on this, like input endorsers and different parameters within Cardano, especially around scaling.
To be clear, like, I'm not IOG. I can't commit them to a timeline. I don't think they can commit them to a timeline. Software development is hard. That's just kind of my gut prediction as an outsider, as somebody who like is watching this play out. I think it's closer than, multiple years. I think it's like the proposal, at least that IOG has put forward, reuses a lot of components. So it's not this big, huge engineering effort, and is achievable. But it's also not, going to happen tomorrow. So
just a quick question: is the European workshop going to be in Dublin by any chance?
I've heard a number of different things floated. I don't know if there's an official thing. I've heard Edinburgh. I've heard Venice.
You don't want to go there. No, you want to go there.
I went there last year. Edinburgh was really cool.
Dublin's better. Trust us.
I'm sure.
Look, I'm looking at the time now, and we have gone well over. But is there anything else you guys want to throw in there? Anyone watching? Any comments, questions before we start to wrap it up? Really important one here. Elon Musk has said, I am an OG and keep up the great work. So
awesome.
Seems legit.
If he's saying it, it must be legit. But look, Pi, really appreciate your time today, both on the call earlier and today. Answered a lot of questions here. I'll be putting timestamps down below. But Paddy, anything you want to throw out before we
finish? I think we talked about it, Paul, was to have a sort of live streamy dedicated governance one, Pi, if you want to come back in the future, and
for sure,
and get Mr. Rick as well, and maybe a few others, just to not a full workshop, but just a talking shop, about the whole idea. And it's maybe a way of helping with the proliferation of the information.
And I'll shout out Kyle, also known as Frog Pool, from he works on Adoja and Drip Drops. He hosts a space place every Thursday, and we've done a number of talks over there about governance. So those videos are really great to watch too if you're looking for something to listen to on a long drive, like somebody was earlier. I'll shout out that. Lots of really good discussion happening in the community. And I'll circle it back to, if you feel excluded and you feel like your voice isn't getting heard, reach out to me and I'll see if I can help change that, right? Like, the discussion is happening, nothing's stopping you from participating. And hopefully I can help amplify your voice, and I can't say that you'll get to make decisions for the Cardano community, but we can at least make sure your voice is heard.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's just for us to help in any way we can, Paul. Was just one idea we could.
I think some week it would be good. Even if it's not on this, we might need to try and find a time that fits everyone, but definitely up for hosting something like that. debate, or maybe not a debate, but whatever you want to call it, discussion on governance to help people understand what's going on and try and get as many people as possible involved.
Yeah, awesome. No, and I think tonight was fun, Pi. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm really glad to see Sundaeswap V2, and we'll say V3 is the next version.
Yeah.
V2 V2? It's not going to work. Awesome.
So if the one thing we got out of this call is that Sundaeswap's next release is V3, we're not going to mix it up with a V2.2.
Hold on. Our next release, because we're going back to iterative releases. So our next release, we're just hoping to have rapid fire features on the front end. But what we're saying is when we rewrite the smart contracts, we'll call that Sundays V3.
Yeah.
Nice.
See, look, Paul, we've helped with marketing. People marketing helping Cardano. We're here.
Nice one. Look, thanks to everyone that tuned in. Actually, I see it here on Cardano Midnight. Have you heard anything on the sidechains, Pi, or Midnight? I haven't heard anything.
Yeah, so
much.
Midnight is going to be, as far as I know, it's going to be its own chain. So it's not really appropriate to call it Cardano Midnight. I think it's focused on interoperability with Cardano, but it is its own full chain. No dust token exists or is for sale. So if you see it so far, it's a scam. I was lucky enough last November to attend a workshop where I got to see kind of a live demo of it. Made my life hell because I was flying around like all over the place to get in Edinburgh, then in Lausanne, and then, but it was really cool to see it. So it's, it's not vaporware. It's not just market. It's like there's something working there. But I don't have any insight onto what the timeline is or anything like that. And but don't buy a dust token yet because it doesn't exist and it's a scam.
Yeah, and that's another topic I'd love to get into, the development side of sidechains, L2s, another week, but I'm not going to get into it now when we're approaching 2 hours. Thanks very much, guys. Appreciate your time, and everyone watching, share it out if you think others can benefit. Any guests you'd like to see us bringing on other weeks, we're open to bringing new people on all the time. I think it's great to get different opinions of what's going on and different topics every week too. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.